Ndị be anyị na Bọlachi, anyị sị ka ọ dịrị unu na mma, anyị sị ka nke onye chikwelu ya zelu. Dịka o si dị, ya bụ Igbo Media ka anyị si bịa na uhuruchi nketa iwetara unu ya bụ ozi gbasara maka ihe na-eme na the Old Eastern Region. Dịka unu anụ ka o si ada, nwanne anyị nwoke wetara anyị ozi n'elu akwụkwọ. Massive good news to the people of Biafra. As the world media, CNN, BBC, is talking about the Biafran civil war, the injustice and brutal committed by Nigerian government to the Biafrans. Hear the news in details. All right, according to Yawuterunu Bosin Ketabu, Kudukun Swimana Tatabo, 38th May Biafran Day. Yes, CNN Okumakia and Kayabo Eswe Noyabogo. And the Alundi Nigerian government made in the Igbo and in the Biafra. So the key be figure say get react to Yabienda Nina. All right, over to you.
It was one of the most brutal and vicious civil wars that much of the world has never heard of. Anyone who lived through Nigeria's Biafra war in the 1960s will forever be haunted by the atrocities, the memories of bodies in the streets, and the fear of not being able to survive another day. After the eastern part of Nigeria declared independence in 1967, the bloody battle that ensued left more than 1 million people dead from starvation, disease, or the endless explosions. The 2.5-year war was literally hell on earth. As many of you who watch this show regularly know, I am Nigerian and I am from the part of the country where this war took place. Family members who lived through it tell me they never knew if they were going to eat, let alone what. It was common for people to feed off of grasshoppers, snakes, and termites. My mother's younger brother died during the Biafra War, and that was considered a very, very lucky outcome. If you only lost one family member, you thanked your lucky stars. So given all of that history and all of that pain, why are there now growing calls for a new secessionist movement in the exact same part of the country? We are joined live now by Ebuka Obi, an expert on Nigeria and sub-Saharan Africa. She's also the head of Eurasia's Group's Africa practice. Ebuka, thank you so much for being with us. So you and I are both Nigerian. It's been over 50 years since this brutal civil war. Why is there this additional secessionist movement in the same part of this country bubbling up?
Look, Zain, the fundamental problem here is that Nigerians don't trust Nigeria, right? Like you said, and there are many reasons for that, right? All the years of military rule, Nigeria has underinvested in Nigerians and in basic services like healthcare, education, infrastructure, and there is then the broader issue of justice, right? We saw the protests last year. Police officers kill people and nothing ever happens to them. So, all of this is taking place in that against this history of the civil war that you just explained, where a lot of people in the Southeast in particular feel like there's never been an official recognition of the suffering of the region, right? We don't have a day every year where the country remembers what happened and these lives that were lost. That was disproportionately in the region, right? We don't even teach the history in the schools.
So let me ask you this, because I think it's important for our audience to note that it's not just the eastern part of Nigeria that wants to break away and have its own country. You have the western part of the country, the Yoruba people that also want to have their own country. Obviously, Boko Haram in the northeastern part of the country, they want to create an Islamic state. It sort of feels as though there are so many different groups in this great nation who have lost faith in this country. So just in terms of the president's strategy here, if there are people who feel marginalized, has the president made any effort to really show these various parts of Nigeria that he understands their concerns and that their voices are being heard?
I would say the government is not doing enough. And look, people have lost faith in Nigeria in part because there's nobody in Nigeria articulating a positive vision for Nigeria's future, right? Nigeria has a crisis of ideas. Nigeria appears not to have any ambition. And look, that is often, in most countries, that's often a role that is played by government. a role that, that to provide a holistic idea about what the country is about and where it's going, to bring people together and drive buy-in. The government is not doing that. But I have to say, Zane, that that's also a role in most parts of the country that is also played by people outside the government. There's a role as well for thought leaders in the country, for private sector participants, to have a constructive vision of where Nigeria should be going, right, and push the government. And that's, there's a symbiotic relationship that can happen here between people inside government and outside government in articulating a positive vision for Nigeria.
I just want to sort of get at how all of this ends, because obviously President Buhari is not going to wake up and say, okay, you get your own country, you get your own country, or you can have autonomy and you can't. He's not going to do that. So how does all of this end?
I don't think it ends until Nigeria starts to really and truly invest in Nigerians, until the Nigerian government, and it's, whether it's Buhari or the person who comes after him, respects Nigerians enough to communicate consistently and clearly where the country is going, what their vision is, right? And then to start to invest in education, in healthcare, in infrastructure, and all of the things that make a society function and make an economy competitive, right? Until that happens, you will continue to see these kinds of calls for secession.
And so, just in terms of what the secessionists want themselves, and obviously, yes, we know they want to break apart and form their own country, but is there anything else that they're willing to accept in the medium term, or is it for IBOP and these other groups, is it really secessionist or nothing?
I do think that for the leaders of some of these secessionist movements, like Nnamdi Kanu, I do think it's secession or nothing. Maybe the leaders of ODC in the Southwest, I think that what their views are probably less relevant than the views of the minority, the populations that are sympathetic to those views. I think for most of those people, most of the people in the Southeast, some of whom are sympathetic to those views, I don't think it's secession or nothing. I do think that a clear and consistent outreach, communication, and investment can help to change some of those views.
I mean, it's such a shame, because Nigeria is such a beautiful country. It has so much potential, and just seeing all of these different areas wanting to separate, saying that they've had enough of being part of this great nation, is very, very sad indeed. Amaka Anku, thank you so much for being with us.
When you look at the facts, that something around 1 million people perished as a result of the actions of the British and Russian and Nigerian federal governments. I don't know what one does call it, but it was pretty close to genocide.
It was the first of the genocidal wars that a great power got as close to as Britain got to the war in Biafra.
And that was totally wrong.
And that was wrong.
Over 1 million Igbos, Biafrans, all British Commonwealth citizens, died in the Nigeria-Biafra civil war. Today, more than 30 years later, questions remain. Was it genocide? Was it backed by the British government, willingly or unwillingly?
If you have part of the population, or as I say, the whole population being wiped out and murdered without any protection on these grounds, ethnic or religious or economic grounds and so on, you have genocide.
The Nigeria-Biafra civil war was also the first media famine. For the first time we saw starving children in newspapers, in magazines and on television.
Well, it was very much the sort of headline news in the papers here for a long time, and opinion was greatly divided as between those who felt that that the Igbos had a case and that Nigeria was badly governed and that it was time that something happened and that the Igbos were good people who deserved to be, and others who felt that Nigeria should remain as it was and the boundaries should remain, and if you fiddled about with the boundaries you were going to be in real difficulty, and it was a very bad precedent for other parts of Africa.
Nigeria, the richest and most populous nation in Africa. 360,000 square miles, the same size as Britain, France and Germany. 65 million people, 3 major tribes, Hausas in the north, Yorubas in the west, Igbos, Biafrans in the east. Some say the British rigged the odds against the Igbos from the beginning, from even before independence.
Of course, we also knew that the elections by 1960 had been rigged. Everybody in the know knew that we had our boys in the north, our puppets, we put them in power. They hadn't won at all. The people in the south had won, the nationalists.
Some say war was inevitable. The rest of Nigeria had always been jealous of the unity, the strength of the Igbos, the way they had managed to march together to build a better future for themselves and their children. In 1966, the world's attention was focused on Eastern Europe and the brutal Russian invasion of Czechoslovakia. The Middle East, the continuing conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, Southeast Asia, the American war in Vietnam and all its horrors. But throughout Nigeria, up to 30,000 Igbos were being attacked and brutally murdered because they were Igbos.
It's those who want us to lose the war in Vietnam. It's militants, activists, revolutionaries, anarchists, and communists. That's who it is.
To the international community, it was just another African conflict. They didn't want to get involved. It was no concern of theirs. They looked the other way. They had other things on their plate.
I would say that there is a difference between when a man belonging to a rich country die and when a man belonging to a poor country dies. Not necessarily black man, because you can have the same problem somewhere in Asia. No, I believe that the United Nations, the international community, is still dominated by a very Europocentric attitude.
Tuesday, May 30, 1967. Enough was enough. The Igbos, alone, isolated, ignored, declared their independence. Their leader was Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu. The supreme commander and head of the military regime in Nigeria was Lieutenant Colonel Gowan. Both men had been educated and trained in Britain. The war that followed was one of the longest, bloodiest and most disastrously fought civil wars in history. In just 3 years, they used more small arms ammunition than was used by British forces during the whole of the Second World War. The casualties were horrifying. The war was also unlike any other civil war in modern history. The Nigerian government, backed by the British, regularly and deliberately strafed and bombed civilian targets.
I saw 10 deliberate bombing attacks on the civilian population, either hospitals or marketplaces, and with no question of any military target being in the vicinity.
At precisely 1:30 every day, they come over the town as the marketplace is full, as patients are sitting out on the lawns at hospitals. Here comes the next one. He's just above the mission now.
I looked up and I heard the explosion. The convent was still there, but then towards the school there was a cloud of smoke rising up to the sky.
The children's ward was the worst. Children's ward got a rocket right through the roof. There was a mother and child killed in bed, and another child was killed in another ward, and another child was cut in half up behind the kitchen.
Why it was deliberate, they finished an operation The next 3 hours they come back again. So you could see that kind of thing for 3 days or 4 days.
Even more horrifying, the Nigerian government deliberately used famine as a weapon of war. The name Harold Wilson became a curse. Starvation was known as the Harold Wilson syndrome. Many people, young and old, rich and poor, went to Biafra to help the starving and the dying. One of the youngest, the most famous, the most glamorous was Princess Cecile de Bourbon-Parma, sister to one of the pretenders to the Spanish throne. She told a committee of the US Senate what she saw. On the committee was Senator Edward Kennedy.
I told him how I have been going out of the Biafra, and that one of the last nights I was with the children and the plane was not coming. And we were very anxious, and I had in my arms a little girl of, I don't know, 10 years old. And she was very anxious herself to see if the plane would come and save her. And finally we hear the motor's engine, the plane is coming. She looked at me, she smiled, and she died. And I looked at Senator Edward Kennedy, and I saw he was crying.
Biafra made aid organisations throughout the world what they are today. It enabled them to develop and perfect their emergency feeding and rescue skills that have since then saved millions of lives around the world.
It was the school of humanitarian action, Biafra, so I think it was the beginning of a new concept of wars and of the relation between humanitarian personnel, armies and the media.
Questions remain unanswered. Was it genocide? Was the bombing and strafing of civilians?
Ngwano, dalo nini no ụmụnne m dịka si na-esoro anyị n'Igbo Media. Gịnị ka unu nwere ikwu na nkọwa nke unu gbasara maka ihe unu nọ n'iru akwụkwọ n'ụbọchị uhuruchi nke taa? Gwa anyị ife iche n'ụdị nke gị. Deela ya n'akara kọmentị ka mara ihe i chere. Ma chetakwa tụsa ya bụ ozi ka o werete ụmụnne anyị ndị ọzọ ntị. Ndewo na ụmụnne m, ka emesịa nụ.